The local children slowly grew curious, bringing small toys to share with Nyla and offering Leary flowers. The girls learned to laugh and run without fear. Leary sometimes still flinched at loud noises, Nyla sometimes woke up crying, but always Samuel was there to remind them they were safe. One evening, as they sat under the stars in Samuel's small garden, Nyla climbed into his lap and looked up. "Can we stay forever?" she asked, voice soft but firm. Samuel hugged her tight. "Forever and a day, little one," he answered, kissing the top of her head. Leary watched, her chest tight and full, as she pressed closer to them. She knew the universe could be cruel, that monsters still lurked out there. But here in this small warm circle, she had found something unbreakable, a love that demanded nothing in return, a home built on kindness and quiet courage. Looking at Samuel and Nyla, Leary felt her heart whisper a word she once thought had no place in her life: family. As the stars watched over them, she let herself finally believe that they would never be alone again. They had each other. And that, she realized, was the only forever they would ever need. The two alien girls huddled close together under the merchant's tent, their thin arms wrapped tightly around each other as if they could disappear into each other's warmth. Their skin was a strange shimmering gray-blue, a color that had once been admired in their homeland but now marked them as worthless cast-offs in this distant human settlement. Their eyes were huge and liquid, reflecting every flickering torch and every cruel smirk cast in their direction. Traders passed by, glancing with idle curiosity at the girls, then moving on with a dismissive wave or a mocking laugh. The elder sister, who barely looked older than 16 by human standards, curled her body protectively around her younger sibling. Every few moments, she whispered words of comfort in their native tongue, though her own lips trembled with cold and fear. The younger one, small enough to be mistaken for a child, clung to her sister's side, her tiny fingers digging into the ragged scraps of cloth that barely covered their forms. They had been brought here in a filthy cargo shuttle, chained with other captives from different stars. Their planet had fallen to raiders months ago, a small farming moon with no defenses, no strong warriors, just gentle people who raised luminous fruit and sang under their bright triple moons. The girls had watched their mother fall to the ground with a silent gasp, her shimmering wings shattering like glass. They had run, holding hands, but were caught by slavers before they even reached the edge of their settlement. Since that day, they had been sold, passed along, ignored, and finally dumped here in the open market, labeled damaged goods by their last owner who couldn't find anyone cruel enough to buy them. It was late afternoon now, and a cold wind whipped across the stones. The elder sister kept her face down, terrified that someone might decide to hurt them for entertainment. The younger one sniffled, her tears turning into tiny frozen crystals along her cheeks. She tried to stay silent, but each shaky breath sounded loud in the empty space around them. A human vendor selling roasted roots stood nearby, occasionally tossing them disgusted looks as though they were stray animals fouling the ground. People came and went, families, merchants, armored guards, each one sparing a glance before moving on to more valuable wares, exotic jewelry, shimmering silks, strange animals in cages. Then footsteps. Not the hurried, heavy steps of traders looking for profit, but slow, steady ones, as if someone was actually looking. The elder sister dared to raise her eyes for a moment. A human male stood there, taller than most she'd seen, wrapped in a heavy coat that looked worn but well-loved. His hair was unkempt, his face weathered by years of travel, but his eyes, they were warm. He didn't look at them like a collector eyeing rare merchandise. He looked at them like a man seeing two frightened souls shivering on the ground. The elder sister immediately dropped her gaze again, her shoulders tightening, waiting for the harsh words, the mocking laughter, the same rejection they'd heard 1,000 times. But he didn't leave. He crouched down slowly, moving as if he didn't want to scare a cornered animal. When he spoke, his voice was low and gentle, like a warm blanket laid across frozen skin. "You too. How long have you been here?" The elder sister pressed her lips together, fighting the urge to cry. Her sister whimpered softly, burying her face in her side. The man looked around, scanning the indifferent crowd, then looked back at them. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not here to sell you or show you off. I saw you shaking, and I couldn't walk away. The elder sister's breath hitched. She had heard humans speak before, but never like this. Always commands, orders to move, threats of punishment. Never a voice that asked, that offered, that cared. She risked another glance, meeting his eyes fully this time. In that moment, something passed between them, something raw and fragile, like a single flame in a winter storm. He reached into his bag, pulling out a piece of bread wrapped in cloth. He didn't shove it at them or toss it on the ground like others had. Instead, he laid it down slowly, hands open. "Please eat. You look like you haven't had food in days. The younger girl peeked out, her eyes darting between the bread and her sister's face. When her sister finally nodded, She reached out cautiously, grabbing the bread with both hands and cradling it like a priceless treasure. She took a small bite first, a test, then her eyes went wide and she started devouring it, crumbs falling everywhere. The man watched her, a small sad smile playing at the corner of his lips. The elder sister hesitated, but the man didn't move or demand she hurry. Eventually hunger won, and she broke off a small piece for herself, chewing slowly as tears slid down her cheeks. The man waited patiently until they finished. Then he spoke again. "What are your names?" The elder sister swallowed, her throat raw from both hunger and fear. I am Mevelin." "She is sorry I dot." Her voice cracked, but she forced the words out. The man nodded, repeating their names softly as if trying to memorize them. "Mevelin. Sorry I. Beautiful names. My name is Aaron dot." A pause stretched between them. Mevelin studied him, her mind racing. What did he want? Why was he still here? Why did he know their names now? Her people had taught her that names held power. If he knew them, he could use them. Yet he only repeated them once more, almost reverently, before exhaling a shaky breath. "You don't belong here, chained and shivering. You need warmth. You need a home dot." Mevelin's heart pounded so loudly she thought it might burst. A home? The word felt like a dream she'd abandoned long ago. The market noise faded around them, the shouting, the bargaining, the laughter, all turned into a distant echo as she focused on Aaron's face. His eyes weren't sharp with calculation, they were soft, filled with something she hadn't seen since her mother's arms held her at night, compassion. Aaron stood up slowly, holding out his hand. "I can't promise a palace. I don't have wealth or silk or warm beds lined with feathers. But I have a small house, a roof, and food enough for all of us. If you come with me, you'll be safe. You'll be family dot." Sorry I turned to Mevelin, her face brightening despite the grime and bruises. Mevelin looked down at her sister, her whole body trembling. Could they trust him? After everything, after the cages, the kicks, the nights spent listening to each other's quiet sobs, could they believe in a human's kindness? Sorry I reached out, her tiny fingers curling around Mevelin's wrist. "Please. I want to go." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it cracked something deep inside Mevelin. She looked up at Aaron again, scanning for any hint of deceit, any hidden cruelty. But she saw only tired eyes and a patient warmth. She swallowed hard, then nodded. She took Soriai's hand and together, they reached out toward Aaron. His hands closed around theirs, warm, steady, real. As he helped them stand, Mevelin nearly collapsed from weakness, but Aaron caught her, slipping an arm around her shoulders as if he'd known her forever. They stepped away from the tent. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, they felt the ground beneath their feet not as prisoners, but as something close to free. The vendors watched in stunned silence. No one shouted after them. No one dared. As they walked, Soriai pressed herself closer to Mevelin, her eyes darting from Aaron's face to the sky above. The sun peeked through a break in the clouds, casting a soft glow on the muddy road. Mevelin clung to Aaron's arm as if it were the last piece of driftwood in a storm. She didn't know where this would end, if it would last, but she knew in this single fragile moment, they had been chosen. Aaron led them out of the market and toward a narrow alley, guiding them carefully around puddles and sharp stones. He spoke to them in a low voice, telling them about his home, how he grew small vegetables in a rooftop garden, how he kept blankets piled high to fight the winter chill, how he read old stories to himself when the nights grew too quiet. Mevelin listened, her heart unsteady, every new detail sewing tiny stitches of hope into her chest. Finally, they reached a small house with faded wooden walls and a crooked roof. It looked like nothing special, just another forgotten corner in the sprawling human settlement. But to Mevelin and Soriai, it glowed brighter than any palace. Aaron opened the door, stepping aside so they could enter first. Inside, it smelled of herbs and old paper, a warm lived-in scent that wrapped around them instantly. Soriai gasped in wonder, her eyes landing on a faded blanket draped across a low couch. Mevelin stood frozen, her eyes wide as she took in the room, the chipped mugs on a shelf, the worn rug, the cracked fireplace. Every imperfection felt like a miracle. Aaron closed the door gently behind them. "You're safe now. You can rest here as long as you need. No one will touch you. No one will take you away again." Mevelin turned to him, tears blurring her vision. She tried to speak but the words dissolved into sobs. She fell to her knees, pressing her forehead to the floor in gratitude. Soriai followed suit, her small body trembling with relief. Aaron knelt beside them, placing a hand on each of their backs. "No bowing. No thanking me. You're not my property. You're not captives anymore. You're home. At that, Mevelin looked up, her face streaked with tears, and for the first time in countless nights, she allowed herself to believe. She wrapped her arms around Soriai, who clung to her fiercely, and they both leaned into Erin's warmth. In that cramped little room, among faded blankets and chipped dishes, something new bloomed quietly, something stronger than chains, sharper than fear. A family began to form. And even though neither of them could say it aloud yet, they knew they had finally been given not just shelter, but the chance to belong. Mevelyn rested her cheek against Soriai's hair, listening to her soft breathing. Erin gently covered them both with a thick wool blanket, tucking it around their shoulders as if he had done it 1,000 times before. He sat back against the wall, keeping watch, his eyes soft but fierce, promising silently to guard them through every coming night. And in the glow of the dying day, Mevelyn let herself imagine tomorrow, a tomorrow where no one would call them worthless, no one would threaten to sell them again. A tomorrow where she could hear Soriai laugh, where they could learn human words, where they might even grow a small flower on that rooftop garden. Tomorrow felt like a dangerous dream. But tonight they were finally warm. And that was enough to keep the dream alive, even in the deepest dark. That first night in Erin's home felt like living inside a fragile dream. Mevelyn and Soriai curled up together on the floor beside the fireplace, wrapped in the heavy wool blanket Erin had given them. Every time the fire cracked, Soriai twitched, her thin fingers clutching her sister's wrist as if afraid they might be taken away again. Mevelyn kept whispering soft words, ancient lullabies from their mother, gentle reassurances she had forgotten she even knew. Erin stayed nearby, sitting on a low stool, occasionally poking the embers back to life. He didn't try to touch them or force them to speak. He just stayed, his presence as steady as the earth beneath their feet. Once, Soriai looked over at him, her wide eyes reflecting the orange glow of the flames. Erin smiled gently and nodded, as if silently saying, "It's all right." Soriai, for the first time in months, managed to close her eyes without trembling. When morning came, they woke to the smell of something unfamiliar but warm. Mevelyn sat up first, blinking in confusion, and saw Erin stirring a small pot over the fire. The smell made her stomach twist and growl so loudly that she pressed both hands over it, embarrassed. Erin heard it and let out a soft chuckle. "I hope you like this. It's not fancy, just a vegetable porridge. But it's filling. He poured the steaming mixture into mismatched wooden bowls, placing them gently in front of the girls. Mevelyn hesitated, looking from the food to Erin, her mind still tangled in old fears. But Soriai reached forward first, scooping up a mouthful and letting out a surprised, delighted sound that almost sounded like a laugh. Mevelyn watched her sister's face light up, saw color slowly returning to her cheeks, and finally dared to try a spoonful herself. The warmth hit her tongue, and she felt her eyes sting. She ate slowly at first, savoring each bite, as if it might vanish the moment she looked away. Erin didn't rush them, only sipping from his own bowl quietly. When they had finished, he stood, collecting the empty dishes and humming softly under his breath. Mevelyn couldn't understand the words, but the gentle tone wrapped around her like a cloak. After he washed up, he returned with a small bundle of clothes. "They're a bit big, but you can adjust them. They're clean. I thought you might want something better than those scraps." Mevelyn took the bundle with trembling hands. The cloth was coarse and simple, but to her, it felt as soft as the moonlight on their old farm back home. Soriai gasped, immediately tugging at the ragged wrap she'd been wearing. Mevelyn helped her change, careful not to touch the bruises that still hadn't healed. Then she dressed herself, her fingers fumbling from both weakness and shock. When they were done, Erin stepped forward again. "There's a small washroom at the back. If you want, you can clean up more comfortably. And after, I can show you the rooftop garden." The word garden made Soriai's head snap up, her eyes wide and bright. Mevelyn felt a sudden tightness in her chest. A garden. They hadn't seen living plants since the night they fled through burning fields. Slowly, she nodded. Erin led them to the tiny bathroom first. They washed with trembling hands, the sensation of clean water on their skin making them shiver and giggle between tears. Mevelyn helped Soriai scrub the soot and grime from her hair, and for a moment, they felt like sisters again, not prisoners. When they emerged, wrapped in the cleaner clothes, Erin guided them up a narrow set of stairs to the rooftop. Mevelyn held Soriai's hand tight as they stepped into the sunlight. What they saw took their breath away. In mismatched pots and cracked ceramic bowls, vegetables and herbs sprouted in every corner. Some grew tall and vine-like, others spread wide with thick green leaves. Tiny flowers peeked out from beneath the leaves, and bees buzzed lazily between blooms. Soriai let out a tiny, odd sound and immediately dropped to her knees beside a patch of bright purple flowers. She reached out carefully, as if she feared they might vanish under her touch. Mevelyn stood frozen, her eyes darting across the rooftop, so much life. So many colors she thought she would never see again. Erin knelt beside Soriai, showing her how to gently cup the flowers without breaking them. These are moon lilies, brought from a trade ship years ago. They only bloom in cooler seasons. And over there, he pointed, are fire peppers. A bit strong, but they're good for keeping warm. Sorei giggled, repeating the words softly as if trying to memorize them. Mevelyn watched them, her throat tightening with every second. After a long time, Aaron stood up and looked at Mevelyn directly. You don't have to decide anything today. Or tomorrow. But I want you to know, you're safe here. You can stay as long as you want. This isn't a cage. You're free. The word free crashed into her like a wave. She dropped her gaze to the rooftop tiles, her mind swirling. She wanted to believe it, every part of her screamed to believe it. But after so many betrayals, so many nights curled up with Sorei under metal grates, it felt dangerous to trust. That night, they ate dinner together at a small wooden table. Sorei chattered excitedly about the flowers, describing each one in broken words. Aaron listened patiently, nodding, encouraging her to speak more. Mevelyn sat quietly at first, but eventually, she found herself smiling at Sorei's excitement, laughing softly when Aaron pretended to misunderstand her descriptions just to make her giggle. When they finished, Aaron set down his spoon and looked across at Mevelyn. May I ask you something? She tensed but nodded. What did you want before all this? Mevelyn stared down at her hands, memories flooding her mind, the soft hum of her mother's songs, the rows of glowing fruit trees, the warmth of a small, simple home. I wanted to be a gardener. Like my mother. She taught me to care for plants, to listen to them. I thought, maybe I could sing to them, and they would grow stronger. Her voice broke at the end, her eyes filling with tears. Aaron reached across the table, his fingers stopping just short of touching hers. You can still do that. You're not too late. You can sing to the rooftop garden whenever you want. You can teach Sorei, too. Mevelyn's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she lowered her head and wept, long silent sobs that rocked her entire body. Sorei immediately climbed into her lap, wrapping her tiny arms around her neck. Aaron stayed close, letting her feel his presence without forcing comfort on her. That night, after Sorei fell asleep curled beside Mevelyn, Aaron sat nearby on a cushion, reading an old book aloud softly. The words meant little to Mevelyn, but the rhythm soothed her, weaving a protective cocoon around them. The next morning, Mevelyn rose before dawn. She stepped quietly out to the rooftop, breathing in the cold morning air. The plants shivered gently under a thin layer of dew. She looked up at the sky, a pale wash of violet and gold just beginning to spread. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she began to sing. The melody was shaky at first, her voice raw from disuse and sorrow. But slowly, the notes smoothed out, growing stronger, floating up into the waking sky. She sang of her mother's hands, of the glowing fruit trees, of laughter echoing under triple moons. She sang of lost warmth, of lost innocence, and of the tiny, impossible hope that had carried her and Sorei this far. Below her, Sorei stirred, blinking awake. She crawled to the edge of the rooftop, watching her sister with wide eyes. When Mevelyn saw her, she reached out, pulling her close, and together they finished the song, two thin voices trembling and rising, wrapping around each other like climbing vines. When the song ended, they sat in silence. Then slowly, Sorei began to hum it back, off-key and hesitant. Mevelyn laughed softly, tears streaming down her face, and kissed Sorei's forehead. Aaron stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, his eyes glistening. Thank you, he whispered. For sharing that. Mevelyn looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time since they had been dragged from their burning farm, she felt the heavy chains around her heart loosen. She felt her mother's spirit close by, almost as if the warmth of her arms had returned. She stood, pulling Sorei up beside her. She stepped toward Aaron and bowed deeply, not the bow of a captive, but a bow of respect, of gratitude. We want to stay, she said, her voice shaking. If you'll let us, we want to be here. We want to help in the garden. We want to live. Aaron's breath hitched, and he nodded quickly, stepping forward. He dropped to one knee, opening his arms. Mevelyn hesitated only a heartbeat before collapsing into his embrace, Sorei squeezing in beside them. In that moment, the last walls around their hearts finally fell. They clung to each other, not as owner and property, not as savior and saved, but as family. From that day forward, Mevelyn tended the rooftop garden with gentle hands and quiet songs, teaching Sorei which leaves to pluck, which petals to protect. Sorei's laughter grew louder each day, echoing across the rooftops like a new dawn. Aaron worked beside them, his rough hands slowly learning the delicate dance of roots and soil. At night, they shared meals at the same small table, telling each other small stories, learning each other's languages, weaving something new from all their broken pieces. Visitors sometimes passed through the alley below and saw the bright plants overflowing from the rooftop, heard the strange haunting songs drifting down, and they would pause, looking up in wonder. Rumors spread about a human who had taken in two broken alien girls and given them not just shelter, but love, a home, and a future. But inside that crooked little house, they didn't care about rumors. They only cared about each other. And so, under a patchwork roof and among mismatched pots, a new family bloomed, stronger and more beautiful than any flower, more resilient than any chain could ever be. Together, they grew. Together, they healed. And together, they finally learned what it meant to belong.